And welcome back to News On. As we mentioned earlier, the president is finally expected to speak about the situation in Afghanistan. This after he and his press secretary, Jen Psaki, have remained, well, pretty much silent about the issue. In fact, the only update we have from the White House so far has been from their Twitter feed. That was yesterday, assuring us that President Biden is on top of the situation. But some argue Biden's past remarks, well, don't seem to instill much confidence that he knows how to handle the situation.
Will not conduct a hasty rush to the exit. We'll do it responsibly, deliberately, and safely.
Is a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan now inevitable?
No, it is not.
Do you see any parallels between this withdrawal and what happened in Vietnam, with some people feeling?
None whatsoever. Zero. There's going to be no circumstance where you see people being lifted off the roof of a embassy of the United States from Afghanistan. It is not at all comfortable. Likelihood there's going to be the Taliban overrunning everything and owning the whole country is highly unlikely.
Don't you bear some responsibility for the outcome if the Taliban ends up back in control and women end up losing the rights?
No, I don't. Do I bear responsibility? Zero responsibility.
Zero responsibility. Now world leaders and the former president, Donald Trump, are calling for Biden to step down. Trump also called Biden a, quote, disgrace over his handling of Afghanistan this yesterday. But Biden isn't taking the blame, as you heard, instead putting it back on Trump, saying that he inherited this problem from Trump and that he is just following through on a deal Trump struck before actually leaving office. Now, to discuss this and so much more, we have radio host and Democratic strategist Robert Patillo and Republican candidate for California's 43rd District, Joe Collins. Quite interesting going back and hearing those past remarks. Robert, I want to start with you. I know you have a lot of family members in the military. The president, again, is expected to speak this afternoon around 3:45 Eastern time. But for weeks now, he hasn't said much of anything. But as you just heard, that was quite a mashup of several other comments that he's made. First off, what is your reaction to some of the previous comments he's made and how he's responding now? Is this the appropriate response you would expect from the leader of the free world?
Actually, it is, and I think if you can look back at historical precedents, very few people pay attention who started the wars. It's always who ends the war that gets the blame, and that has to bear the brunt of history falling upon them. Whether we had ended this war in 2002, 2022, or 2200, it would have ended in exactly the same way, because there was never a strategic plan going in. There was never a plan to secure the peace, as George W. Bush used to say. And at the end of the day, you have people serving there in Afghanistan right now, or just leaving the country, who were not even born at the beginning of this war. So I think that we do have to look at the national security apparatus in the United States of America. How do we stop these wars of adventurism? How do we stop these colonial wars around the world and get back to what the ideas of George Washington and the Monroe Doctrine were, which was to defend the American homeland.
Robert, hold on here. This is the longest war. Yes, Americans have wanted this war to end for some time. He has been in office. President Joe Biden has been in office now for 7 months. You just heard him say he takes zero responsibility, that he didn't think the Taliban would take over. Boy, did he underestimate. They were talking about maybe 90 days that they could seize the capital of Afghanistan. This happened in a matter of days. When does he take responsibility? How many months? How many years does it take?
Well,
you're saying because he didn't start the war, he doesn't take any responsibility for ending the war?
As recently as yesterday on the RNC website, there was a page dedicated to the deal that he is following through on that was struck by Pompeo last year with the Taliban government. Let's understand that the reason that they did not believe the capital would fall this fast because they thought that the Afghani people and the Afghani leadership and military would stand up. The reason it fell this fast because the government of Afghanistan was completely corrupt and part of the Taliban already. That's why it's been a bloodless takeover in many ways of the entire country, because there was complicity of the government there installed. This was a failure from the beginning and from its inception. He followed through on the agreement that was struck by Pompeo, and what President Biden has done is the hard thing, which is rip the Band-Aid off, say this has been a failed excursion, and get the American people back on a footing where we're not in a continuous war for the remainder of human existence in Afghanistan.
But what about the threat? What about the threat internationally that this could have? And Joe, I do want you to weigh on this, but Robert, what about the threat that this could have internationally? We all saw what happened with ISIS.
We've seen all these things rise in the entire time. The entire point of this war initially was to secure the American homeland from threats from Al Qaeda and from the Taliban at the time in the Middle East. Right now, America cannot prove to be any more secure because of 20 years of war. But what we do know is that we have.
But he said he was going to do this, so we were going to withdraw responsibly. Those were the words from the President of the United States, that we were going to withdraw from this responsibly. Is this responsible?
This is the most responsible way that it could be done. You have to rip the Band-Aid off. When we tried to do this a decade ago...
So why even say that then?
Well, hold on.
So why even say that?
Because this is the responsible way of doing. When we tried to do this a decade ago under the Obama administration, you had Lindsey Graham and John McCain and other Republicans standing up and saying we were cutting and running and that we were going to abandon our allies. It turns out we had no allies there. The government was complicit with the Taliban the entire time. We were simply funding and giving the Taliban 21st century military weapons and getting absolutely nothing out of it. So the fact that Joe Biden was willing to have the gall and the fortitude to stand up and say we are no longer doing this, we will not invest trillions of dollars to be buried in a desert, we will not sacrifice American blood and treasure to support the Taliban, which already runs the government. I think that's what true leadership is, and that's the responsible way of leaving than simply trickling out of the country, killing more Americans on the way out.
So, Joe, your reaction to how the president has thus far responded now and in the past. Again, he's expected to speak today. And then also your response to what Robert Patillo said, which, if I'm understanding you, Robert, you're saying that this was a war that we had no business getting into, that they were corrupt to begin with, and this was a no-win situation. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I think it's disrespectful altogether. I mean, we've spent millions and millions of dollars on wars fighting the Taliban. We've lost thousands on thousands of American troops fighting this war now to pull out of Afghanistan and let the Taliban, who, mind you, we've been fighting for the last 20 years, take over the government. It makes it seem like, Americans die for nothing. We spent money for nothing. And this is under the Obama administration where he was, like Robert Patillo said, I absolutely agree, giving them 21st century weapons to use against our troops. Now it's like we're moving out of this area and allowing the Taliban to come in. All the lives of Americans who were lost in Afghanistan fighting the Taliban were absolutely for nothing, and it's disrespectful. And I agree with everybody who says that it's time for Joe Biden to stand down.
But Joe, let me ask you this, going to some of the points that Robert brought up. For people who may not be familiar with it, it was the U.S. that also armed the Taliban to fight against Russia, then the Soviet Union back then during the invasion. We also know there have been a number of people who have been very critical of Pakistan, and that Pakistan has also been very friendly with the Taliban. Let's not forget Osama bin Laden was found outside a military compound in Pakistan. And we've been giving Pakistan tons and tons and tons of money. Does Robert bring up a point that none of these people can basically be trusted?
I mean, you can go back to the Bible days, and this country has been at war since the Bible, and they're still at war right now. From the get-go, we had no business being in this war, but since we've gotten into this war, I think that we have to ensure that the mission objective is completed, and the mission objective have not been completed, especially if the Taliban resurges and takes over Afghanistan.
Real quickly, gentlemen, and I want to get both of you to respond to this. Robert, what do you anticipate to hear, and 15 seconds to you, from the president?
I think Joe Biden's going to make it very clear that this was the only option. It was either going to get done now or it was going to get done tomorrow, but at some point we were going to have this exact same situation, and that what the American people have to do going forward is to stop having military venturism around the world and defend our homeland and allow the Afghanis to govern themselves accordingly. We need to concentrate on defending Americans here at home. Joe,
last 15 seconds to you on the same question.
I expect to hear more nonsense. Joe Biden's been blowing smoke up the American people's butts since he's been in Senate, and the same thing has happened since he's been the president of the United States. I expect to hear nothing but gibberish.
All right, again, we're expecting the president to speak at 3:45 Eastern Time. Be sure and keep it right here on Real America's Voice for